This is a continuation of The Covered Wagon by Emerson Hough, comprising chapters 4 through 8. Chapter 4. Fever of New Fortunes. The notes of a bugle, high and clear, sang reveille at dawn. Now came hurried activities of those who had delayed. The streets of the two frontier settlements were packed with ox teams, horses, wagons, cattle driven through. The frontier stores were stripped of their last supplies. One more day, and then on to Oregon. Wingate broke his own camp early in the morning and moved out to the open country west of the landing, making a last bivouac at what would be the head of the train. He had asked his 4 lieutenants to join him there. Hall, Price, and Kelsey headed in with straggling wagons to form the nucleuses of their columns, but the morning wore on, and the Missourians, now under Woodhull, had not yet broken park. Wingate waited moodily. Now at the edge of affairs, human apprehensions began to assert themselves, especially among the womenfolk. Even stout Molly Wingate gave way to doubt and fears. Her husband caught her, apron to eyes, sitting on the wagon tongue at 10 in the morning, with her pots and pans unpacked. "What?" he exclaimed. "You're not weakening? Haven't you as much courage as those Mormon women on ahead? Some of them pushing carts, I've heard." "They've done it for religion, Jess. Oregon ain't no religion for me. Yet it has music for a man's ears, Molly." "Hush, I've heard it all for the last 2 years. What happened to the Donners 2 years back? And 4 years ago it was the Applegates left home in old Missouri to move to Oregon. Who will ever know where their bones are laid? Look at our land we left, rich, black and rich as any in the world. What corn, what wheat. Why, everything grew well in Illinois. Yes, and cholera below us wiping out the people, and the trouble over slaveholding working up the river more and more, and the sun blazing in the summer, while in the winter-time we froze. Well, as for food, we never saw any part of Kentucky with half so much grass. We had no turkeys at all there, and where we left you could kill one any gobbling time. The pigeons roosted not 4 miles from us. In the woods along the river even a woman could kill coons and squirrels, all we'd need, no need for us to eat rabbits like the Mormons. Our chicken yard was 50 miles across, the young ones to be flying by roasting ear time, and in fall the sloughs was black with ducks and geese. Enough and to spare we had, and our land opening, and Molly teaching the school, with $12 a month cash for it, and Ted learning his blacksmith trade before he was 18. How could we ask more? What better will we do in Oregon?" "You always throw the wet blanket on Oregon, Molly. It is so far." "How do we know it is far? We know men and women have crossed, and we know the land is rich. Wheat grows 50 bushels to the acre, the trees are big as the spires on meeting houses, the fish run by millions in the streams. Yet the winters have little snow. A man can live there and not slave out a life. Besides," and the frontier now spoke in him, "this country is too old, too long settled. My father killed his elk and his buffalo too in Kentucky. But that was before my day. I want the buffalo. I crave to see the plains, Molly. What real American does not—" Mrs. Wingate threw her apron over her face. "The Oregon fever has witched you, Jessie," she exclaimed between dry sobs. Wingate was silent for a time. "Corn ought to grow in Oregon," he said at last. "Yes, but does it? I never heard it didn't. The soil is rich, and you can file on 640 acres. There's your donation claim, 4 times bigger than any land you can file on here. We sold out at $10 an acre. More'n our land really was worth or ever is going to be worth. It's just the speculators says any different. Let 'em have it and us move on. That's the way money's made, and always has been made, all across the United States." "Huh, you talk like a land speculator your own self." "Well, if it ain't the movers make a country, what does? If we don't settle Oregon, how long'll we hold it? The preachers went through to Oregon with horses. Like as not even the Applegates got their wagons across. Like enough, they got through. I want to see the country before it gets too late for a good chance, Molly. First thing you know, buffalo'll be getting scarce out west too. Like deer was getting scarcer on the Sangamon. We ought to give our children as good a chance as we had ourselves." "As good a chance? Haven't they had as good a chance as we ever had? Didn't our land more'n thribble from $1.25? It may thribble again, time they're old as we are now." That's a long time to wait. It's a long time to live a lifetime, but everybody's got to live it. She stood, looking at him. Look at all the good land right in here. Here we got walnut and hickory and oak, worlds of it. We got sassafras and pawpaw and hazelbrush. We get all the hickory nuts and pecans we like any fall. The wild plums is better than any in Kentucky. And as for grapes, they're big as your thumb and thousands on the river. Wait till you see the plum and grape gel I could make this fall. Women, always thinking of gel. But we got every herb here we need, boneset and sassafras and Injun physic and bark for the fever. There ain't nothing you can name we ain't got right here, or on the Sangamon, yet you talk of taking care of our children. Huh. We've moved 5 times since we was married. Now just as we got into a good country, where a woman could dry corn and put up gel, and where a man could raise some hogs, why, you wanted to move again, plumb out to Oregon. I tell you, Jesse Wingate, hogs is a blame sight better to tie to than buffalo. You talk like you had to settle Oregon. Well, haven't I got to? Somehow it seems a man ain't making up his own mind when he moves west. Pap moved twice in Kentucky, once in Tennessee, and then over to Missouri, after you and me was married and moved up into Indiana, before we moved over into Illinois. He said to me, and I know it for the truth, he couldn't hardly tell who it was or what it was hitched up the team. But first thing he knew, there the old wagon stood, front of the house. Cover all on, plow hanging on behind, tar bucket under the wagon, and dog and all. All he had to do, Pap said, was just to climb up on the front seat and speak to the team. My ma, she climbed up on the seat with him. Then they moved. On west. You know, Molly. My ma, she climbed up on the front seat. His wife suddenly turned to him, the tears still in her eyes. Yes, and Jesse Wingate, and you know it. Your wife's as good a woman as your ma. When the wagon was a-standing, cover on, and you on the front seat, I climb up by you, Jess, same as I always have and always will. Haven't I always? You know that. But it's harder on women moving is. They care more for a house that's rain-tight in a storm. I know you did, Molly, said her husband soberly. I suppose I can pack my gels in a box and put in the wagon anyways. She was drying her eyes. Why, yes, I reckon so. And then a few sacks of dried corn will go mighty well on the road. One thing, she turned on him in wifely fury. You shan't keep me from taking my bureau and my 6 chairs all the way across. No, nor my garden seeds, all I saved. No, nor yet my rose roots that I'm taking along. We got to have a home, Jess. We got to have a home. There's Jed and Molly coming on. Where's Molly now? Suddenly asked her husband. She'd ought to be helping you right now. Oh, back at the camp, I suppose. Her and Jed, too. I told her to pick a mess of dandelion greens and bring over. Larking around with them young fellows like enough. Huh. She'll have less time. If Jed has to ride herd, Molly's got to take care of that team of big mules, and drive 'em all day in the light wagon, too. I reckon if she does that, and teaches night school right along, she won't be feeling so gay. They tell me folks has got married going across, she added, not to mention buried. One book, we had said, up on the Platte, 2 years back, there was a wedding and a birth and a burying in one train, all inside of 1 hour and all inside of 1 mile. That's Oregon. Well, I reckon it's life, ain't it? Rejoined her husband. One thing, I'm not keen to have Molly pay too much notice to that young fellow Banyan. Him, they said, was a leader of the Liberty wagons. Huh. He ain't leader now. You like Sam Woodhull better for Molly, Jess? Some ways. He falls in along with my ideas. He ain't so apt to make trouble on the road. He sided in with me right along at the last meeting. He done that? Well, his father was a sheriff once, and his uncle, Judge Henry D. Showalter, he got into Congress. Politics. But some folks said the Banyans was the best family. Kentucky, they was. Well, comes to siding in, Jess. I reckon it's Molly herself'll count more in that than either of them or either o' us. She's 18 past. Another year and she'll be an old maid. If there's a wedding going across— There won't be, said her husband shortly. If there is, it won't be her and no William Banyan. I'm saying that. Chapter 5. The Black Spaniard. Meantime, the younger persons referred to in the frank discussion of Wingate and his wife were occupying themselves in their own fashion their last day in camp. Molly, her basket full of dandelion leaves, was reluctant to leave the shade of the grove by the stream, and Jed had business with the team of great mules that Molly was to drive on the trail. As for the Liberty train, its oval remained unbroken, the men and women sitting in the shade of the wagons. Their outfitting had been done so carefully that little now remained for attention on the last day, but the substantial men of the contingent seemed far from eager to be on their way. Groups here and there spoke in monosyllables, sullenly. They wanted to join the great train, had voted to do so, but the cavalier deposing of their chosen man Banyan, who before them all at the meeting had shown himself fit to lead, and the cool appointment of Woodhull in his place, had on reflection seemed to them quite too high-handed a proposition. They said so now. "Where's Woodhull now?" demanded the bearded man who had championed Banyan. "I see Will out rounding up his cows, but Sam Woodhull ain't turned a hand to hooking up to pull in west of town with the others." "That's easy," smiled another. "Sam Woodhull is where he's always going to be, hanging around the Wingate girl. He's over at their camp now." "Well, I don't know's I blame him so much for that neither, and he can stay there for all of me. For one, I won't foller no Woodhull, least o' all Sam Woodhull, soldier or no soldier. I'll pull out when I get ready, and tomorrow mornin' is soon enough for me. We can jine on then, if so's we like." Someone turned on his elbow, nodded over shoulder. They heard hoofbeats. Banyan came up, fresh from his new work on the herd. He asked for Woodhull, and learning his whereabouts trotted across the intervening glade. "That's sure a hoss he rides," said one man. "And a sure man a-ridin' of him," nodded another. "He may ride front of the train and not back a hit, even yet." Molly Wingate sat on the grass in the little grove, curling a chain of dandelion stems. Nearby, Sam Woodhull, in his best, lay on the sward regarding her avidly, a dull fire in his dark eyes. He was so enamored of the girl as to be almost unfit for aught else. For weeks he had kept close to her. Not that Molly seemed overmuch to notice or encourage him. Only woman fashion, she'll like to send away any attentive male. Just now she was uneasy. She guessed that if it were not for the presence of her brother Jed nearby, this man would declare himself unmistakably. If the safety of numbers made her main concern, perhaps that was what made Molly Wingate's eye light up when she heard the hooves of Will Banyan's horse splashing in the little stream. She sprang to her feet, waving a hand gaily. "Oh, so there you are," she exclaimed. "I was wondering if you'd be over before Jed and I left for the prairie. Father and Mother have moved on out west of town. We're all ready for the jump-off. Are you?" "Yes, tomorrow by sun," said Banyan, swinging out of saddle and forgetting any errand he might have had. "Then it's on to Oregon." He nodded to Woodhull, who little more than noticed him. Molly advanced to where Banyan's horse stood, nodding and pawing restively as was his wont. She stroked his nose, patted his sweat-soaked neck. "What a pretty horse you have, Major," she said. "What's his name?" "I call him Pronto," smiled Banyan. "That means sudden." "He fits the name. May I ride him?" "What? You ride him?" "Yes, surely. I'd love to. I can ride anything. That funny saddle would do. See how big and high the horn is, good as the fork of a lady's saddle." "Yes, but the stirrup." "I'd put my foot in between the flaps above the stirrup. Help me up, sir." "I'd rather not," Molly pouted. "Stingy." "But no woman ever rode that horse. Not many men but me. I don't know what he'd do." Only one way to find out. Jed, approaching, joined the conversation. "I rid him," said he. "He's a goer, all right, but he ain't mean." "I don't know whether he would be bad or not with a lady," Banyan still argued. "These Spanish horses are always wild. They never do get over it. You've got to be a rider." "You think I'm not a rider? I'll ride him now to show you. I'm not afraid of horses." "That's right," broke in Sam Woodhull. "But Miss Molly, I wouldn't tackle that horse if I was you. Take mine." "But I will. I've not been horseback for a month. We've all got to ride or drive or walk 1,000 miles. I can ride him, man, saddle and all. Help me up, sir." Banyan walked to the horse, which flung a head against him, rubbing a soft muzzle up and down. "He seems gentle," said he. "I've pretty well topped him off this morning. If you're sure." Help me up, one of you? It was Woodhull who sprang to her, caught her up under the arms and lifted her fully gracious weight to the saddle. Her left foot by fortune found the cleft in the stirrup fender. Her right leg swung around the tall horn, hastily concealed by a clutch at her skirt even as she grasped the heavy knotted reins. It was then too late. She must ride. Banyan caught at a cheek strap as he saw Woodhull's act, and the horse was the safer for an instant. But in terror or anger at his unusual burden, with flapping skirt and no grip on his flanks, the animal reared and broke away from them all. An instant, and he was plunging across the stream for the open glade, his head low. He did not yet essay the short, stiff-legged action of the typical bucker, but made long, reaching, low-headed plunges, seeking his own freedom in that way, perhaps half in some equine wonder of his own. None the less, the wrenching of the girl's back, the leverage on her flexed knee, unprotected, were unmistakable. The horse reared again and yet again, high, striking out as she checked him. He was getting in a fury now, for his rider still was in place. Then with one savage sidewise shake of his head after another, he plunged this way and that, rail fencing it for the open prairie. It looked like a bolt, which with a horse of his spirit and stamina, meant but one thing, no matter how long delayed. It all happened in a flash. Banyan caught at the rein too late, ran after, too slow, of course. The girl was silent, shaken, but still riding. No footman could aid her now. With a leap, Banyan was in the saddle of Woodhull's horse, which had been left at hand, its bridle down. He drove in the spurs and headed across the flat at the top speed of the fast and racy chestnut. No match, perhaps, for the black Spaniard, where the latter once extended, but favored now by the angle of the two. Molly had not uttered a word or cry, either to her mount or an appeal for aid. In sooth, she was too frightened to do so. But she heard the rush of hoofs and the high call of Banyan's voice back of her. Ho, pronto, pronto, vien aquí. Something of a marvel it was, and showing companionship of man and horse on the trail. But suddenly the mad black ceased his plunging. Turning, he trotted whinnying as though for aid, obedient to his master's command. Come here! An instant, and Banyan had the cheek strap. Another and he was off, with Molly Wingate, in a white dead faint, in his arms. By now others had seen the affair from their places in the wagon park. Men and women came hurrying. Banyan laid the girl down, sought to raise her head, drove back the two horses, ran with his hat to the stream for water. By that time, Woodhull had joined him, in advance of the people from the park. What do you mean, you damned fool? You, by riding my horse off without my consent, he broke out. If she ain't dead, that damned wild horse, you had the gall. Will Banyan's self-restraint at last was gone. He made one answer, voicing all his acquaintance with Sam Woodhull, all his opinion of him, all his future attitude in regard to him. He dropped his hat to the ground, caught off one wet glove, and with a long backhanded sweep struck the cuff of it full and hard across Sam Woodhull's face. Chapter 6. Issue joined. There were dragoon revolvers in the holsters at Woodhull's saddle. He made a rush for a weapon. Indeed, the crack of the blow had been so sharp that the nearest men thought a shot had been fired. But swift as was his leap, it was not swift enough. The long, lean hand of the bearded Missourian gripped his wrist even as he caught at a pistol grip. He turned a livid face to gaze into a cold and small blue eye. No, ye don't, Sam, said the other, who was first of those who came up running. Even as a lank woman stooped to raise the head of Molly Wingate, the sinewy arm back of the hand whirled Woodhull around, so that he faced Banyan, who had not made a move. Will ain't got no weapon, and ye know it, went on the same cool voice. What ye mean, a murder besides that? He nodded toward the girl. By now the crowd surged between the two men, voices rose. He struck me, broke out Woodhull. Let me go. He struck me. I know he did, said the intervener. I heard it. I don't know why. But whether it was over the girl or not, we ain't going to see this other feller shot down till we know more about hit. Ye can meet? Of course, any time. Banyan was drawing on his glove. The woman had lifted Molly, straightened her clothing. All blood, said one. That saddle horn. What made her ride that critter? The Spanish horse stood facing them now, ears forward, his eyes showing through his forelock not so much in anger as in curiosity. The men hustled the two antagonists apart. "Listen, Sam," went on the tall Missourian, still with his grip on Woodhull's wrist. "We'll see you both fair. You've got to fight now, in course. That's the law. And I ain't learned it in the fur trade of the Rockies for nothing, nor have you people here in the settlements, but I'll tell you one thing, Sam Woodhull, ef you make one move afore we'uns tell you how and when to make hit, I'll drop ye, shore's my name's Bill Jackson. You gotta wait. Both on you. We're startin' out, and we can't start out like a mob. Take your time." "Any time, any way," said Banyan simply. "No man can abuse me." "How'd you gentlemen prefer for to fight?" inquired the man who had described himself as Bill Jackson, one of the fur brigaders of the Rocky Mountain Company, a man with a reputation of his own in plains and mountain adventures of hunting, trading, and scouting. "Hit's your choice of weapons, I reckon, Will. I reckon he challenged you all. I don't care. He'd have no chance on an even break with me, with any sort of weapon, and he knows that." Jackson cast free his man and ruminated over a chew of plug. "Hit's over a gal," said he at length, judicially. "Hit ain't usual, but seein' as a gal don't pick atween men because one's a quicker shot than another, but because he's maybe stronger or something like that, why, how'd knuckle and skull suit you two roosters? Best man win and us to see hit fair. Hit's one of you for the gal, like enough. But not right now. Wait till we're on the trail and clean of the law. I hearn there's a sheriff round here, Summers." "I'll fight him any way he likes, or any way you say," said Banyan. "It's not my seeking. I only slapped him because he abused me for doing what he ought to have done. Yes, I rode his horse. If I hadn't, that girl would have been killed. It's not his fault she wasn't. I didn't want her to ride that horse." "I don't reckon it's so much a matter about a hoss as hit is about a gal," remarked Bill Jackson sagely. "You'll had her fight. Well then, seein' as hit's about a gal, knuckle and skull, is that right?" He cast a glance around this group of other fighting men of a border day. They nodded gravely, but with glittering eyes. "Well then, gentlemen," and now he stood free of Woodhull, "ye both give word you'll make no break till we tell ye? I'll say 2-3 days out." "Suits me," said Woodhull savagely. "I'll break his neck for him." "Any time that suits the gentleman to break my neck will please me," said Will Banyan indifferently. "Say when, friends. Just now I've got to look after my cows. It seems to me our wagon master might very well look after his wagons." "That sounds," commented Jackson. "That sounds. Sam, get on about your business, or you can't travel in the Liberty train nohow. And don't you make no break in the dark especial, for we can track ye anywheres. You'll fight fair for once, and you'll fight." By now the group massed about these scenes had begun to relax, to spread. Women had Molly in hand as her eyes opened. Jed came up at a run with the mule team and the light wagon from the grove, and they got the girl into the seat with him, neither of them fully cognizant of what had gone on in the group of tight-mouthed men who now broke apart and sauntered silently back, each to his own wagon. Chapter 7. The Jump-Off. With the first thin line of pink, the coyotes hanging on the flanks of the great encampment raised their immemorial salutation to the dawn. Their clamorings were stilled by a new and sterner voice, the notes of the bugle summoning sleepers of the last night to the duties of the first day. Down the line from watch to watch passed the Plains command, "Catch up! Catch up!" It was morning of the jump-off. Little fires began at the wagon messes or family bivouacs. Men, boys, barefooted girls went out into the dew-wet grass to round up the transport stock. A vast confusion, a medley of unskilled endeavor marked the hour. But after an hour's wait, adjusted to the situation, the next order passed down the line. "Roll out! Roll out!" And now the march to Oregon was at last begun. The first dust cut by an ox hoof was set in motion by the whip-crack of a barefooted boy in jeans, who had no dream that he one day would rank high in the councils of his state, at the edge of an ocean which no prairie boy ever had envisioned. The compass finger of the trail, leading out from the timber groves, pointed into a sea of green along the valley of the Kaw. The grass, not yet tall enough fully to ripple as it would a half-month later, stood waving over the black-burned ground which the semi-civilized Indians had left the fall before. Flowers dotted it, sometimes white like bits of old ivory on the vast rug of spindrift, the pink verbena, the wild indigo, the larkspur, and the wild geranium, all woven into a wondrous spangled carpet. At times also appeared the shy buds of the sweet wild rose, loveliest flower of the prairie. Tall rosin weeds began to thrust up rankly. Banks of sunflowers prepared to fling their yellow banners miles wide. The opulent, inviting land lay in a ceaseless succession of easy undulations, stretching away illimitably to far horizons. In such exchanging pictures of grace and charm as raised the admiration of even these simple folk to a pitch bordering upon exaltation. Here lay the West, barbaric, abounding, beautiful. Surely it could mean no harm to any man. The men lacked experience in column travel, the animals were unruly. The train formation, clumsily trying to conform to the orders of Wingate to travel in 4 parallel columns, soon lost order. At times the wagons halted to reform. The leaders galloped back and forth, exhorting, adjuring, and restoring little by little a certain system. But they dealt with independent men. On ahead, the landscape seemed so wholly free of danger that to most of these the road to the far west offered no more than a pleasure jaunt. Wingate and his immediate aides were well worn when at mid-afternoon they halted, 15 miles out from Westport. "What in hell you pulling up so soon for?" demanded Sam Woodhull surlily, riding up from his own column, far at the rear, and accosting the train leader. "We can go 5 miles further anyhow, and maybe 10. We'll never get across in this way." "This is the very way we will get across," rejoined Wingate. "While I'm captain, I'll say when to start and stop. But I've been counting on you, Woodhull, to throw in with me and help me get things shook down." "Well, it looks to me you're purty brash as usual," commented another voice. Bill Jackson came and stood at the captain's side. He had not been far from Woodhull all day long. "You're a natural damned fool, Sam Woodhull," said he. "Who elected you for train captain, and when was it did? If you don't like the way this train's run, go on ahead and make a train of your own, if that's way you feel. Pull on out tonight. What you say, Cap?" "I can't really keep any man from going back or going ahead," replied Wingate. "But I've counted on Woodhull to hold those Liberty wagons together. Any plainsman knows that a little party takes big risks." "Since when did you come a plainsman?" scoffed the malcontent, for once forgetting his policy of favor-currying with Wingate in his own surly discontent. He had not been able to speak to Molly all day. "Well, if he ain't a plainsman yet, he will be, and I'm one right now, Sam Woodhull." Jackson stood squarely in front of his superior. "I say he's talking sense to a man that ain't got no sense. I was with Donovan, too. We found ways, huh?" His straight gaze outfronted the other, who turned and rode back. But that very night, 8 men, covertly instigated or encouraged by Woodhull, their leader, came to the headquarters fire with a joint complaint. They demanded places at the head of the column, else would mutiny and go on ahead together. They said good mule teams ought not to take the dust of ox wagons. "What do you say, men?" asked the train captain of his aides helplessly. "I'm in favor of letting them go front." The others nodded silently, looking at one another significantly. Already cliques and factions were beginning. Woodhull, however, had too much at stake to risk any open friction with the captain of the train. His own seat at the officers' fire was dear to him, for it brought him close to the Wingate wagons, and in sight, if nothing else, of Molly Wingate. That young lady did not speak to him all day, but drew close the tilt of her own wagon early after the evening meal, and denied herself to all. As for Banyan, he was miles back, in camp with his own wagons, which Woodhull had abandoned, and on duty that night with the cattle guard, a herdsman and not a leader of men now. He himself was moody enough when he tied his cape behind his saddle and rode his black horse out into the shadows. He had no knowledge of the fact that the old mountain man, Jackson, wrapped in his blanket, that night instituted a solitary watch all his own. The hundreds of campfires of the scattered train, stretched out over 5 miles of grove and glade at the end of the first undisciplined day, lowered, glowed, and faded. They were one day out to Oregon and weary withal. Soon the individual encampments were silent, save for the champ or cough of tethered animals, or the whining howl of coyotes prowling in. At the Missouri encampment, last of the train, and that heading the great cattle drove, the hardy frontier settlers, as was their wont, soon followed the sun to rest. The night wore on, incredibly slow to the novice watch for the first time now drafted under the prairie law. The sky was faint pink, and the shadows lighter when suddenly the dark was streaked by a flash of fire, and the silence broken by the crack of a border rifle. Then again and again came the heavier bark of a dragoon revolver, of the sort just then becoming known along the western marches. The camp went into confusion. Will Banion, just riding in to take his own belated turn in his blankets, almost ran over the tall form of Bill Jackson, rifle in hand. "What was it, man?" demanded Banion. "You shooting at a mule?" "No, a man," whispered the other. "He ran this way. Reckon I must have missed. It's hard to draw down into a hindsight in the dark, and I just chanced hit with the pistol. He was running hard." "Who was he? Some thief?" "Like enough. He was crawling up towards your wagon. I halted him and he run." "You don't know who he was?" "Number I'll see his tracks, come day. Go on to bed. I'll set out a whiles, boy." When dawn came, before he had broken his long vigil, Jackson was bending over footmarks in the moister portions of the soil. "Tall man, young and tracked clean," he muttered to himself. "Fancy boots, with rather little heels. Shame I done missed him." But he said nothing to Banion or anyone else. It was the 20th time Bill Jackson, one of Sublet's men and a nephew of one of his partners, had crossed the plains, and the lone hand pleased him best. He instituted his own government for the most part, and had thrown in with this train because that best suited his book, since the old pack trains of the fur trade were now no more. For himself, he planned settlement in eastern Oregon, a country he once had glimpsed in long-gone beaver days, a dozen years ago. The eastern settlements had held him long enough. The army life had been too dull, even with Donovan. "I must be gettin' old," he muttered to himself as he turned to a breakfast fire. "Missed, at 70 yard. Chapter 8, Man Against Man. There were more than 2,000 souls in the great caravan which reached over miles of springy turf and fat creeklands. There were more than 1,000 children, more than 100 babes in arm, more than 50 marriageable maids pursued by avid swains. There were bold souls and weak, strong teams and weak, heavy loads and light loads, neighbor groups and coteries of kindred blood or kindred spirits. The rank and file had reasons enough for shifting. There were a score of Helens driving wagons, reasons in plenty for the futility of all attempts to enforce an arbitrary rule of march. Human equations, human elements would shake themselves down into place, willy-nilly. The great caravan therefore was scantily less than a rabble for the first 3 or 4 days out. The 4 columns were abandoned the first half-day. The loosely knit organization rolled on in a broken-crested wave, 10, 15, 20 miles a day, the horse and mule men now at the front. Far to the rear, heading only the cow column, came the lank men of Liberty, trudging alongside their swaying ox teams, with many a monotonous, "Gee-ho-haw, get along thar, you buckin' star." So soon, they passed the fork where the road to Oregon left the trail to Santa Fe, topped the divide that held them back from the greater valley of the Kaw. Noon of the 5th day brought them to the swollen flood of the latter stream, at the crossing known as Papin's Ferry. Here the semi-civilized Indians and traders had a single rude ferry boat, a scow operated in part by setting poles, in part by the power of the stream against a cable. The non-committal Indians would give no counsel as to fording. They had ferry hire to gain. Word passed that there were other fords a few miles higher up. A general indecision existed, and now the train began to pile up on the south bank of the river. Late in the afternoon, the scout Jackson came riding back to the herd where Banion was at work, jerking up his horse in no pleased frame of mind. "Will," said he, "leave the boys' ride now and come on up ahead. We need you." "What's up?" demanded Banion. "Anything worse?" "Yes. The old fool's had a row over the ferry boat. It'd take 2 weeks to get us all over that way anyhow. He's declared for fording the hull outfit, lock, stock, and barrel. To save a few dollars, he's a-going to lose a lot of loads and drown a lot of women and babies. That's what he's going to do. Some of us called a halt and stood out for a council. We want you to come on up. Woodhull's there," he added. "He sides with the old man, of course. He rid on the same seat with that gal all day till now. Lord knows what he done or said. Ain't hit nigh about time now, Major." "It's nigh about time," said Will Banion quietly. They rode side by side, past more than a mile of the covered wagons, now almost end to end, the columns continually closing up. At the bank of the river, at the ferry head, they found a group of 50 men. The ranks opened as Banyan and Jackson approached, but Banyan made no attempt to join a council to which he had not been bidden. A half-dozen civilized Indians of the cause, owners or operators of the ferry, sat in a stolid line across the head of the scow at its landing stage, looking neither to the right nor the left and awaiting the white men's pleasure. Banyan rode down to them. "How deep?" he asked. They understood, but would not answer. "Out of the way!" he cried, and rode straight at them. They scattered. He spurred his horse, the black Spaniard, over the stage and on the deck of the scow, drove him its full length, snorting, set the spurs hard at the farther end and plunged deliberately off into the swift, muddy stream. The horse sank out of sight below the roily surface. They saw the rider go down to his armpits, saw him swing off saddle, upstream. The gallant horse headed for the center of the heavy current, but his master soon turned him downstream and inshore. 100 yards down, they landed on a bar and scrambled up the bank. Banyan rode to the circle and sat dripping. He had brought not speech but action, not theory but facts, and he had not spoken a word. His eyes covered the council rapidly, resting on the figure of Sam Woodhull, squatting on his heels. As though to answer the challenge of his gaze, the latter rose. "Gentlemen," said he, "I'm not myself, governed by any mere spirit of bravado. It's swimming water, yes, any fool knows that, outside of yon one. What I do say is that we can't afford to waste time here fooling with that boat. We've got to swim it. I agree with you, Wingate. This river's been forded by the trains for years, and I don't see as we need be any more chicken-hearted than those others that went through last year and earlier. This is the old fur trader crossing, the Mormons crossed here, and so can we." Silence met his words. The older men looked at the swollen stream, turned to the horseman who had proved it. "What does Major Banyan say?" spoke up a voice. "Nothing," was Banyan's reply. "I'm not in your council, am I?" "You are, as much as any man here," spoke up Caleb Price, and Hall and Kelsey added ye to that. "Get down, come in." Banyan threw his rein to Jackson and stepped into the ring, bowing to Jesse Wingate, who sat as presiding officer. "Of course we want to hear what Mr. Banyan has to say," said he. "He's proved part of the question right now. I've always heard it's fording, part way, at Papin's Ferry. It don't look it now." "The river's high, Mr. Wingate," said Banyan. "If you ask me, I'd rather ferry than ford. I'd send the women and children over by this boat. We can make some more out of the wagon boxes. If they leak, we can cover them with hides. The sawmill at the mission has some lumber. Let's knock together another boat or two. I'd rather be safe than sorry, gentlemen, and believe me, she's heavy water yonder." "I've never seed the cow so full," asserted Jackson. "And I've crossed her 20 times in spring flood. Do what you like, you all. Old Missouri's going to take her slow and keerful." "Half of you Liberty men are a bunch of damned cowards," sneered Woodhull. There was silence. An icy voice broke it. "I take it that means me?" said Will Banyan. "It does mean you if you want to take it that way," rejoined his enemy. "I don't believe in 1 or 2 timid men holding up a whole train." "Never mind about holding up the train. We're not stopping any man from crossing right now. What I have in mind now is to ask you, do you classify me as a coward just because I counsel prudence here? You're the one is holding back. Answer me, do you call that to me?" "I do answer you, and I do call it to you then," flared Woodhull. "I tell you you're a liar, and you know it, Sam Woodhull. And if it pleases your friends and mine, I'd like to have the order now made on unfinished business." Not all present knew what this meant, for only a few knew of the affair at the rendezvous, the Missourians having held their council in the broken and extended train, where men might travel for days and not meet. But Woodhull knew, and sprang to his feet, hand on revolver. Banyan's hand was likewise employed at his wet saddle holster, to which he sprang, and perhaps then one man would have been killed but for Bill Jackson, who spurred between. "Make one move and I drop ye," he called to Woodhull. "Ye've give your promise." "All right then, I'll keep it," growled Woodhull. "Ye'd better. Now listen. Do you see that tall cottonwood tree a half-mile down, the one with the flat umbreller top like a cypress? Ye kin? Well, in half a hour be there with 3 of your friends, no more. I'll be there with my man and 3 of his no more. And I'll be one of them 3. I allow our meanin' is to see hit fair. And I allow that what has been unfinished business ain't going to be unfinished come sundown. Does this suit you, Will? It's our promise. Officers didn't usually fight that way. But you said it must be so, and we both agreed. I agree now. You other folks all stay back, said Bill Jackson grimly. This here is a little matter that us Missourians is going to settle in our own way and in our own camp. Hit ain't none of you one's business. Hit's plenty o' ourn. Men started to their feet over all the riverfront. The Indians rose, walked down the bank covertly. Fight! The word passed quickly. It was a day of personal encounters. This was an assemblage in large part of fighting men, but some sense of decency led the partisans to hurry away, out of sight and hearing of the womenfolk. The Belltop Cottonwood stood in a little space which had been a dueling ground for 30 years. The grass was firm, and even for a distance of 50 yards in any direction, and the light at that hour favored neither man. For Banyan, who was prompt, Jackson brought with him 2 men. One of them was a planter by name of Dillon, the other none less than stout Caleb Price, one of Wingate's chosen captains. I'll not see this made a thing of politics, said he. I'm Northern, but I like the way that young man has acted. He hasn't had a fair deal from the officers of this train. He's going to have a fair deal now. We allow he will, said Dillon grimly. He was fully armed, and so were all the seconds. For Woodhull showed the Kentuckian, Kelsey, young Jed Wingate, the latter by Woodhull's own urgent request, and the other train captain, Hall. So in its way, the personal quarrel of these 2 hotheads did in a way involve the entire train. Strip your man, commanded the tall mountaineer. We're ready. It's go till one hollers enough. Far stand up, heel and toe, no button or gougin'. Fust man to break them rules gets shot. Is that your understanding, gentlemen? How we get it, yes, assented Kelsey. See you enforce it then, for we're a-goin' to, concluded Jackson. He stepped back. From the opposite sides, the 2 antagonists stepped forward. There was no ring, there was no timekeeper, no single umpire. There were no rounds, no duration set. It was man to man, for cause the most ancient and most bitter of all causes, sex. This concludes the second part of 12 total of The Covered Wagon by Emerson Hough, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.